Welcome into the Houston Texans fantasy football review for 2024 season. They're not the same old Texans. They're not your grandpa's Texans. Well, that doesn't even make sense because they've only been around 20 years. But this Texans team is different. No one had expectations for them last year. They were awesome. CJ Stroud was awesome. They won a playoff game. Now they have 5 fantasy players going in the first 6 rounds, 4 in the first 4 rounds. So this team is stacked for fantasy. We're expecting big jump from them, and that's probably correct. So we're starting off with, go ahead.
In a big change from just a year ago where we didn't know anything. So just kind of goes to show you, a quarterback. Look what it can do for a team. That's it's crazy.
Yeah.
So.
And no one was excited about Stroud to the Texans, and I think Dameon Pierce was their highest drafted player, and he's not even being drafted now. So it's kind of crazy. It all starts with Stroud. He is obviously the person that makes the train move, the engine of this team, and he was awesome last year for a rookie. One of the best rookie seasons we've seen, both stat-wise and just success-wise, to lead that team to the playoffs and to win a playoff game. Obviously, guys like Justin Herbert or something have had better statistical seasons, but, in terms of team success and stats, he was the man. He's now being drafted as QB5 in round 4, ADP 45. You see his numbers there. He was a top 10 quarterback in points per game at 18.7 points. But that being said, I'm not going to draft CJ Stroud this year, unfortunately, just because I generally wait on quarterbacks. If I do take a quarterback high, it's going to be a guy who runs the ball. At least someone who runs, it gives you some production. CJ Stroud averaged, I think, 11 yards rushing per game last year. 11.1, and essentially every year there's about one quarterback who finishes in the top 5 or so who rushes for less than 15 yards a game. There's about one of them. Now that could be CJ Stroud this year, but I just feel like we're drafting him at his absolute peak. Like if he finishes as QB5, you drafted him as QB5. I don't see the upside for him to be QB1. And I think there's a good chance he falls between QB 7 and 10, which is still really good, but I don't want to draft that at the peak.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement on his. The team did well. He led the team. His typical stats were okay and stuff like that, but there's definitely room for improvement. We're talking numbers like yards and touchdowns and things like that. So I agree with your analysis there that, I don't know. I'm not taking him that high. I know he gets he gets talked about a lot and he should. So, but there could be, the NFL's kind of funny that they figure you out a little bit. So I'm not saying there's going to be a drop off or anything else, but there's not going to be this big explosion of yards and touchdowns. I don't think so. But
yeah, I think there's a good chance we see bigger numbers for sure. Like again, his numbers last year in 15 games, he missed 2 games, so 4,100 yards, 23 touchdowns. So I think he was on pace for more like if he played those other 2 games, he was averaging 273 yards per game, which actually led the NFL. So you're looking at closer to 4,600 yards and 26 touchdowns. I could see the yards slightly going up, staying the same or going up. I could definitely see the touchdowns going up, just because rookie quarterbacks, the biggest concern for them is touchdowns. I guess the one feather in the cap for CJ Stroud is if you look at his numbers when he had Nico Collins and Tank Dell there, he was a beast. He was averaging like 26 fantasy points per game. And now you have those 2 guys, of course, and you have Stephon Diggs there, right? So you have a third guy to throw the ball to. So, I mean, again, I'm not going to be surprised if he finishes as QB5. I'm not going to be surprised if he throws 35 touchdowns. I just don't want to draft that at the peak. So, now Mixon is the new face in town here. One of the new faces, Joe Mixon, Mr. Consistent as the Cincinnati Bengals lead guy. 28 years old. He's going in round 4 as RB15. Look at the numbers there. He was RB4 in 2021, RB9 in 2022, RB12 in 2023. Just absolutely consistent. I don't see that changing at all this year. He's on a really good offense. He's going to have a lot of touchdown opportunity. He's never been a super efficient guy, so all he needs is...
Yeah, he catches the ball a lot too.
He does. He does catch the ball a lot. Now, that may go down just because there's a lot more mouths to feed here, but it could stay. He's going to catch 2 to 3 dump offs every game. Every game he's going to catch 2 to 3 dump offs. So he's almost guaranteed 40 catches if he plays the whole season. So are you in on Joe Mixon kind of mid to late round 4 as RB15?
Yeah, maybe a little early, but I'm in on Joe Mixon. But I guess I'd like to, at my idea where he should go, and round 4 maybe seems a little early, but I do like Joe Mixon. Kind of surprised he was only a RB12 last year in 2023. Just looking at those numbers, I thought he had a little better year in Cincinnati than that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that offense, wasn't great, but it got going there for a while. But yeah, I mean, here's the guys, running backs that are going around him. James Cook. Do you want James Cook or do you want Joe Mixon?
Mixon.
Kenneth Walker or Joe Mixon?
Mixon.
Alvin Kamara or Joe Mixon?
Probably Mixon. I think Kamara, even slight downturn a little bit, but
yeah. And we approach things from a half PPR point of view. I think PPR you could make the case for Kamara, but I kind of agree with you there. So in terms of where he's going, I think we like him. I actually kind of like this value for him a little bit, just because like all those guys I just mentioned, Cook, Mixon, Walker, Kamara, like those guys are all going at the mid to end of the fourth round. So I feel like, man, I could start off wide receiver, and get one of those guys as my RB1, and I'm happy. Like I'm happy with that, because I think they all could be RB1. So yeah, I think there's good value there. I think he's basically going to do what he's been doing in Cincinnati, which is 1,200 to 1,500 total yards with 40 catches and a chance for double-digit touchdowns. So now the wide receivers is where it gets very interesting. In a vacuum, without knowing draft capital, who do you want? Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, or Tank Dell?
I hate to say it, but I think Diggs.
Okay, that's fair. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Collins, wow, really close behind.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say Tank Dell's going to be the odd guy out, but I'm not sure he's going to get the volume that we would expect. So you're going to see highlights of Tank Dell, and he's going to play well, as long as he's healthy and everything else. But I'm not sure. Yes, slot guys, he could be like who's the New England guy, Julian Edelman and stuff like that. So
yeah, here's my response to that is, I know we think of Tank Dell as a slot guy because he's small. He plays on the outside, like he did in college and he did last year. He was an outside receiver. He played 494 snaps. So basically 500 snaps, 370 of those were on the outside. So he was lining up on the outside 75% of the time. So I actually think how this is all going to work out is it's going to be Nico, Dell, and Diggs on 3 wide receiver sets. It's going to be Nico and Dell on the outside, Diggs on the slot. Now, what do they do in 2 wide receiver sets? Is it Diggs or is it Dell? I don't know. That's where we don't know. Now, that's going to be the point of like, okay, whoever that is probably going to be more valuable for fantasy. So in terms of draft costs, Nico Collins is going early 3rd round, mid 3rd round, actually. This is half PPR numbers, by the way. And by the way, I didn't mention this. We're recording this on August 2nd. So keep that in mind. Also, one more thing before I get into these receivers. Robert, and I don't hear anyone talk about this when they talk about these Texans receivers. Robert Woods and Noah Brown last year, who are still on the team, keep that in mind. But those guys accounted for 130 targets last year combined. So if we just consolidate this into Dell, Diggs, and Nico, all 3 of these guys could be very good. So Nico Collins is going as wide receiver 14 in round 3. Mid round 3, he was wide receiver 6 last year with almost 15 points per game. Stephon Diggs is going round 4 at the very beginning of round 4 as wide receiver 18, averaged 13 points per game last year, but was really bad to kind of end the year. And then there's Tank Dell, who is going in round 6, kind of middle of round 6, averaged 12.9 points per game. So one thing I'll say about Dell is if you take out the 2 games that one of them he left like early, did nothing, and another one he left early, if you take those 2 games out and you kind of extrapolate what he was doing, we would be talking about Tank Dell as like in the realm of Puka Nacua. He was like on pace for like 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns, like ridiculous numbers. So now that you know the draft value, so either a mid 3rd round pick on Nico, a early 4th round pick on Diggs, or a early to mid 6th round pick on Dell, are you still taking Diggs?
No.
Is it Dell now?
I'd probably draft value, it'd probably be Tank Dell, So I think, between Diggs and Collins, draft value and all that other stuff aside, I think Diggs will have more receptions. Okay. I think Collins will have more yards.
Yeah. And Dell could have the most touchdowns.
Yeah, now touchdowns, I don't know. That's what I was the next thing I was going to say. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out, and and then we haven't even talked about the tight end yet. So
I know it's crazy, which is again why people are taking CJ Stroud as the QB5. Tank Dell had 7 touchdowns in 11 games, and that's not a fluke. He was a touchdown, like the dude in college was just like crazy with touchdowns. Like I know it's easy to think of him as a slot receiver because he's 160 pounds or whatever, but he had 17 touchdowns his last year in college, 12 the second to last year. So we're talking about 30 touchdowns in 2 years, which is crazy. I agree. My order with draft cost is Dell, Nico, Diggs. That's how I am. I just think if there is going to be a crunch for targets and kind of like what I said with the Bears guys, I don't think like Keenan Allen for the Bears, he needs the volume. Stephon Diggs, I think at this point in his career, kind of needs the volume a little bit, right? Like I don't know if he can be a top 12 wide receiver with 80 catches. I do think Nico Collins, who was, by the way, only 80 catches last year, was a top 6 wide receiver. And I think Dell can also be that with kind of an 80 catch type of season. So both those guys, I think, could be super explosive. And I think Diggs really needs that volume. And I'm just worried about, we did see Diggs just not look good last year. Yeah. And generally older players, when they show you that there looks like they're getting old, usually means they're getting old. It's very rare for a player to look old-ish and then come back at the age of 30 and look young again.
Yeah, you can see the drop off for sure. And there was a kind of a shift in the Buffalo offense because they fired their offensive coordinator and they went to more run heavy, but it's still You can tell. You can kind of tell that the Diggs thing in Buffalo had run its course. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right, but all that being said, again, like basically, um, Tank Dell last year was getting about, I think, 6 to 7 targets a game, right? Nico Collins, he only had 109 targets in 15 games. Like that's not a crazy amount. It's really good, but he was getting about 7 targets a game. And then I talked about it, 130 targets went to guys like Noah Brown and Robert Woods. So all 3 of these guys could get 7, 8 targets a game easily. I just think who's going to be able to do more with that? It's going to be Dell and Collins. So, anything else there with those 3 receivers?
No, I think we've covered it about as well as we could.
Well, you mentioned Dalton Schultz, which kind of throws a little bit of a wrench into things, and as well as Mixon, by the way, like who does catch a lot of passes. But Dalton Schultz was the tight end 11 last year. He's the one that's suffering the most here. He's going all the way in round 10 as tight end 14. So you may be able to get him a little later because everyone at that point has their tight end. 8.1 points per game in half PPR. Any interest in Dalton Schultz, or do you think it's going to be kind of like the Cole Kmet situation of like he's going to have to catch some touchdowns to really be useful?
Yeah, I think for me, I think I'm going to look elsewhere for a tight end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then some tight ends in that range where he's going, like Pat Freiermuth or Dalton Schultz?
Probably Freiermuth.
Kind of like him this year.
Yeah, I think Pittsburgh's wide receiver class is not plentiful or anything. So,
Goddard or Schultz?
Probably Goddard.
Yeah. And then, after that, though, it's kind of guys like Cole Kmet, who's in a very similar situation to Schultz. I'd probably just lean Schultz there.
Yeah.
Luke Musgrave, kind of in a similar situation, a lot of mouths to feed. I'd probably lean Schultz. Tyler Conklin, kind of a sneaky Jets, tight end. But, he's kind of right at that fringe player where, like, okay, yeah, maybe I want to look elsewhere, or maybe I want to take him because there's really not much else after that. So, yeah, it just feels like he's probably going to get his, 3-4 catches a game and his 50 yards a game, but he's going to need a plus touchdown type of season to be useful, I think. But there's always the injury upside as well. Someone could get hurt. So that's about it for the Texans. I mean, they have all those players going in the top 6, but there's really no one else to talk about for that reason. It's the 3 receivers. Stroud, Mixon, I think we're both kind of out on Stroud where he's going, even though we think he's amazing. We love Mixon. I do want one of these wide receivers. Like I want to take a chance on one of them. So for me, it's Dell, given draft cost, Dell, Collins, Diggs. For you, Dad, I think it's Dell, Diggs, Collins. So yeah, any last words on the Texans?
No, kind of a nice problem to have, kind of wish some of these guys were spread out over other teams, but yeah, there's going to be some producers here of big, I'm going to say pretty good fantasy numbers. So
yeah. And by the way, I didn't mention him in the wide receiver corps. I kind of did, but Robert Woods and Noah Brown are still there. Those are nice wide receiver 4s and 5s to have on your team.
I'm hoping the Lions trade for Robert Woods.
Yeah.
Robert Woods nice. And Jared Goff were teammates in LA. The Lions kind of need another wide receiver, and Robert Woods would fit in very well. But anyway, that's
for sure. But if they don't keep them, like that's a nice, again, like, okay, Tank Dell's out for 2 games. You just plug in Robert Woods and you're fine for 2 games.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, we'll be back. We are talking about the division rival Indianapolis Colts in the next video. So we will catch you all in that video.